Hey, good afternoon, and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. It's Monday, April 26th, and this briefing is brought to you by HealthScreen and Healthy Visitor. HealthScreen and Healthy Visitor are actually, if you're not aware, daily health screening of your employees and visitors is still a requirement. And rather than old school paper and pencil, this is a really easy way to do that through a text-based system. Keeps you compliant. It's an easy lift, and you can find out more at healthycomply.com. I'm Rob Fowler. I'm the CEO of SBAM, and Brian Calley is our president. And we've been doing these briefings for 161 briefings, Brian. I feel like maybe I ought to start to add the year to the date when I start, because we've done one on April 26th before, and it's hard to believe we've been at this for over a year.
Yeah, who would have ever imagined that? Even though it seemed like we were, probably by summer we knew that it was going to be a long haul. But yeah, even I'm surprised, and I pay close attention to these numbers. Yeah. That here we are a year later. Although you definitely can see a pathway out that's been kind of murky this whole time.
Yeah. And by the way, today is also World Intellectual Property Day. I sent you a card, so you probably got it in the mail today, but happy IP Day. There's that. It's also Data Monday, and that has really become our pattern of just digging into the data a little deeper on Mondays. It's a fascinating set of data, and there's a fascinating thing happening that you just sort of alluded to that does seem like there maybe is a pathway forward. Let's dig in.
All right, so it's a good report today in most respects, and so I want to start where we always start, which is just the raw case count. And you see it's on a pretty steep decline. And I want to make 2 points with this first graph. And the first point is that this right here, this period of time that we were kind of at a peak before, a plateau, it lasted 3 weeks. That does not appear to be the case now. And so we're going to take a closer look at that in the next slide. The other thing I want to point out is look at the steepness of this. Now that we know that we've peaked and we're coming down over here, we can kind of compare these two. So look at the steepness here. Okay, it's steep. This right here, not as steep. They got to the same height. See the third peak. Remember, we had one back in the spring of last year, a year ago. But so this third peak, we're at 78.73, and this other one is 76.04. So about the same in terms of the peak. This one, it went up slower, and you can already tell it's coming down sharper. And we're going to look at an update of this graph in a minute. But it was right around this time here when the media was just hammering on Governor Whitmer. Why aren't you shutting things down? And what we knew, because we have evidence from all over the place, literally from within our state and all over the country, that there are waves. Things go up and things go down, and whether you increase your rules or decrease your rules, it only makes marginal impacts on these waves. And we knew that it was about to start going down. Thankfully, there weren't additional restrictions added right at the time when it was already going to naturally start coming down, and not just come down sharper. So overlaying these two waves from the spring and from now, you'll see that we're coming down faster than we did previously. So here, this blue line, that's the wave in the fall, and the green line is what's happening right now. So it's coming down faster. Now this, the Merck reports are always 4 or 5 days older than what's available when we do this briefing. So I went ahead and added in a chart that I pulled from Bridge from Bridge publication on that goes all the way through Saturday. And so starting in March all the way through Saturday, and look how much more it's come down. So this steep decline continues. So pretty happy about that. Now, as we take a look at the positivity percentage, you'll see that it is also coming down pretty sharply. Overall percent positive was higher this time than when it peaked in the fall, although its decline looks a little sharper. And again, same type of thing, looking all the way through Saturday. I pulled this from Wood TV. Look at that latest positivity rate, 11.1%. So definitely heading in the right direction. So when I'm predicting whether cases are going to go up or down, this is my leading indicator. So if I see the positivity rate is getting larger each day, then I know cases are going to go up. And if it's getting smaller every day, I know cases are in the decline and will continue to decline. And that's the case that we're in. So this positivity rate is going down very rapidly now. And that has started now. That's a lagging indicator to what happens in hospitals. So hospitals about a week to 10 days behind the cases going down. You see hospitalization starting to go down. And again, we see this steeper than before. So this is a pretty impressive drop for just a few days, 43.79 down to 39.18. So a drop of over 400, about 450 cases in a short period of time in hospitalization. And that's partly because hospitalizations, the people being hospitalized right now are younger on average than before. And so their hospital stays, they don't get as sick as when you're older. And so their hospital stays, even the serious cases, tend to be shorter. So let's take a look. This is kind of a messy chart. I just did a screenshot from the state, but I wanted to show you each of these regions. So region 1 through 8, these are the Merck regions for the whole state. And so like region 6 is Traverse City, region 8 is the Upper Peninsula. You got regions 2 north and south are Detroit. So where are hospitalizations going down? The answer is everywhere. So this is last week's number. So in region 1, it was 352. Now it's 302. In region 2 south, that'd be like the southern half of Detroit, 1196 down to 1043. So right across the board, every single region sees a decline in hospitalization. Where you see the biggest vaccine impact, of course, is on fatalities. So this, just comparing the wave in the fall to the wave right now, what would we have expected to see with death? This red line, if it did what it did last time, we would see deaths per day right now at almost 120. And yet it's down here. And that's about a 50-person difference, more than a 50-person difference. There are 650 fewer deaths now because of the vaccine than there otherwise would have been in this particular wave. So looking at how we're doing by age category in terms of vaccinations, we see these numbers creeping up slowly, but those who are most vulnerable, 80% of deaths related to COVID-19 fall in this 65 and over category, 96% in the 50 and over categories. So we see these percentages continue to climb. So that's good. One thing I want to point out, though, is that in this current wave, even though deaths are way down, 70% of those deaths are still in this age group. And so even though 72% is pretty good, but 70 or 27% of people, almost 30% of people over age 65 are not vaccinated. That's still a lot of people. And when you have a wave like we just went through, you're going to see people have very serious adverse effects. So even though this population is highly vaccinated, we know from the hospital data that the ones who are getting sick, by and large, are not the ones who have been vaccinated. It's around 99%, 99% plus of the people in the hospital have not been vaccinated. And so it's really pretty incredible to see just the overall effectiveness and the protection provided to those who have received the vaccine. So looking at how we're doing compared to the country, we're still number one. And even though, so all this data comes from the CDC. So we look at all the states and territories compared to the CDC. These are the highest infection rates in the country, and Michigan is still number one. Now it's come down since this was created last week. So our number is a lot lower than this, but really most of these are lower as well. So there are a few states that are going up still, but most of them are going down. Like Colorado is on the way up right now. Actually, Puerto Rico is another one that's on the way up. But most of these states, New Jersey and New York, are in Florida even going down. So really, our country overall, here's what our country looks like. You know, when we were rising kind of steadily and slowly here, I was afraid we were at the beginning of a substantial increase like Michigan was. That has not turned out to be the case. It looks like the vaccination progress on top of just, the natural immunity from people who've had COVID has really started to kick in and hold this number at bay. Even though a lot of the rules and restrictions around the country have been lifted, not so much in Michigan compared to other places, but this number has stayed remarkably stable. If you look at the heat map here, the United States, you'll see Michigan still looks darker, and that's because we are number one, right? We're darker, but this is nowhere near as dark as this map looked just a little while ago. So good. We're definitely heading in the right direction. Looking across the country, you'll see that the overall caseload has declined over the last 14 days, 16%. So really good outcomes there. Hospitalizations and deaths are kind of mixed, but remember, those are lagging indicators. So if we were to look back at what was happening just a few weeks ago in our country, we had cases modestly on the rise, and now they're starting to decline. So it makes sense that these numbers would not look as good as this number here, the cases. And then, but here's the globe. Here's planet Earth, and you'll see that there's a major increase here, 22% over the last 14 days. Much of that right now is being driven by the country India, over 1 billion people in India and having some real serious issues. Looking at our vaccine progress, I would characterize this as kind of a status quo report in terms of our standing compared to other states. So, we were 26th best in terms of our doses per 100,000 for last week. We were 24th before in the top 20 states. We're 12th instead of 13th. Pretty similar, basically the same type of performance relative to other states. And that shows up in this line graph. Here are the top performing states in terms of vaccines getting done. Here are the bottom performing states, in Michigan right here in the middle, the green line. But here's the bad news. If there's one piece of information I was very disappointed about in this report, it is that the average doses per day, 1,000 doses per day, down total to about 80,000. It was at 95,000. So the number of doses a day over the last week has really dropped quite a bit. And it's not in second doses, it's in first doses. And that is not what you want to see. So the new people joining the ranks of those with immunity from the vaccination has dropped 15,000 people per day on average. And that actually coincides, Rob, with the Johnson & Johnson announcement when they pulled Johnson & Johnson off for additional study. We'll talk about that more in a little bit, but that really, maybe it's just a coincidence, but that does correlate with this drop. And I worry that there was some confidence lost, even though it was kind of an abundance of caution decision that they've reversed now. We do have a lot of supply, and I mean a lot of supply building in our state. So there are now doses on hand in Michigan of 1.7 million. So that is an indication that supply is exceeding demand. Now, this number looks a lot bigger than it did when we looked at the report last week, and that is because we were pulling from the state's numbers that only had the distribution that was running through the state. But there's distribution that's going through the federal long-term care program. There's distribution that's going directly to pharmacies. When you add all of those things together, we have 1.7 million doses that are in our state and available, but have not been administered. And you can kind of see that happening all over the place. Walk-in appointments almost anywhere for, and your walk-in options almost anywhere in the state now. One thing I wanted to point out, just really a shout out to the folks that do the data at the Michigan Economic Recovery Council. When I was saying back in February and March that, look, I know it doesn't seem like it now, but by the time we get to spring, there's going to be more vaccines than people who want them, and it's going to be available to everybody whenever they want. And it was based on this chart. And this shows here what the projected demand was going to be. So it's this line right here is the projected demand and this is for our country, but to get to 200 million people right here. And this right here, this line is was the projected supply. So it was right here in the springtime when supply was projected to not just go past demand, but to blow way past demand. And so that's exactly what has happened. So we have way more supply than demand. And the key is to try and figure out how to get the demand up so we can hit that level where Israel is right now, which is over 60%. If we can get over 60% of our population, not the eligible population, but the total population, then that plus natural immunity from people who have had the infection equals herd immunity. And if you look at those numbers in Israel, it is really impressive what has happened while they have moved toward substantial, reopening and easing of rules and restrictions and so forth.
Well, that is, I think the point. I think at some point, and the evidence is it's starting to happen. You got 1.7 million doses in supply. There are 10 million people in the entire state of Michigan. And I realize that's, there are two doses, but that's beginning to be a pretty significant number, suggesting that people who want it are getting it. And at some point that has to affect the rules, much like it is in Israel. What do you think are the triggers now, or what should they be? What's our thinking about this as we go forward?
One of the challenges is that right now there really aren't guidelines or benchmarks where if we hit this number, then we know that these rules back off. And so I think our advocacy before was all about risk mitigation. What are the practices required to stay open? At some point, though, there's enough of the population vaccinated, and everybody else who is not vaccinated has chosen not to be vaccinated, with the exception of kids, of course, that aren't eligible for the vaccine, but also have a risk that is extremely low, about the same, according to the New York Times, as the common flu. So for kids, it's low risk like the flu. For older people, it's a lot higher risk than the flu. So as long as all of the adults and anybody over 16 has had the opportunity, at what point do we say we're done with the rules and restrictions, and now we're going to go back to something that looks a lot more like normal life? Because the fact that some people chose not to take it shouldn't really hold the rest of us back, right? So I think that is the next generation of kind of rule debate, is when do we drop the rules in recognition that everybody who wants a vaccine has had the opportunity to get one.
I think you mentioned the Johnson & Johnson vaccination, and just the headlines may have given people pause. It's interesting, on Friday, the Food and Drug Administration lifted their suspension. They're out of the penalty box. They're back out on the ice. Does that help? Or certainly it's going to help supply, but supply is not the problem right now.
Yeah, there's a couple of things where I think it's going to make a big difference. I mean, the reputational damage has already been done. So I think that there's a strong case to make that um, that the feds, when they pulled it off to look at this issue, they already knew the answer when they started, which was that extremely rare um, blood clots, if it's connected, even if it is connected to the vaccine, that it's way smaller than the risk of blood clots with the virus, and therefore they came to a conclusion that they always knew they were going to come to, but I think they wanted to look, real, tough and studious and make sure they were being as careful as possible. I am afraid though that it did kind of set the effort back on the fence sitters, the ones that are like, I don't know if I want to move forward or not. So uh, by making this change, I think it makes some difference with that population that was on the fence. But I think where it makes a bigger difference are for more transient populations where coordinating a two-dose schedule is much more difficult, or in those cases where you have to go to somebody instead of that person coming to you. In other words, you got to send a nurse out or a different healthcare worker out to give somebody a shot who's not able to come to a site where you have hundreds or thousands of people all coming into. I think in those cases, um, you're really going to have uh, an important tool in the Johnson and Johnson vaccine.
So it's interesting, just looking sort of across the globe. Um, as America uh, begins to see supply outstripping demand, there is an effort to, I think, share, and we probably overbought, and uh, apparently the United States government owns a lot of AstraZeneca doses, which haven't even been approved by the US FDA. It has been an interesting cautionary tale, though, about where it's produced.
So the United States is in a really strong position right now. In other words, we have more vaccines than we need. Our neighbor to the north, Canada, has been they've not made a they have not been quiet about being somewhat offended, right? That the United States took so much supply. Um, I think there's a very good chance that, according at least to some statements by the Biden administration, that acknowledging we do have more than we could ever possibly use. It's time to ship it out and share it around the globe. Um, so that's a great position to be in, right? You can make sure that your citizens are taken care of. But the other side of that is that there are countries that aren't in that position, relying on supplies that come from other places. And there are many countries in Africa, for example, that are relying on production out of India. Now, India, if you're watching the news, is a hotspot in the world. It's over 350,000 cases per day identified, but based on the positivity rates, which are sky high, that's nowhere near how many actual infections are taking place daily in that country. So that their numbers are sky high. And what their government is doing is saying, okay, we're going to keep all of the vaccines here, regardless of contracts with other countries. And so those other countries are scrambling now. What do they do? And so that, I wanted to throw that in here in this discussion just to kind of underscore the importance that there are things that we take for granted. Domestic production of medicine, domestic production of things like automobiles or aircraft, the sorts of things that you need for our economy to work. The domestic production of energy. Of course, there's a lot of renewable energy. There's other non-renewable sources of energy as well. But all of these things, I mean, I think there's a cautionary tale here as you look around the globe. Those countries who rely too much on other countries, when the going gets tough, when things get difficult and complicated, then countries are going to look out for themselves, and that's what's happening now around the globe. And it just makes me so thankful that while we have seen a lot of things sent offshore in our country over the last 50 years, yeah. This is an important one that we were still well positioned to make sure that the production was maximized and the needs of our citizens were met.
All right, I want to get to a couple of other issues in the last few minutes we have here. Early on in the pandemic, there was a requirement to be eligible for unemployment insurance that you had to. There was a long-term requirement. You had to be seeking work. That was the term. And early in the pandemic, that was dropped or at least loosened. And now there's a debate in Lansing about that requirement coming back. What's the latest on that?
We are hearing from employers with really at a level higher than before the pandemic that just can't find employees, trying to get ramped back up, trying to get going, and cannot find employees. At the same time, we still have between 800,000 and 900,000 people on unemployment, and so as you had mentioned, it used to be a requirement if you were on unemployment, you had to be actively searching for work, and the way that worked was you registered with Michigan Works. It's like a state-based employment agency, some accountability that if you're going to get unemployment, you will be looking for work. You can't just stay on unemployment. That was waived before. In the most recent orders, it's not formally waived, but what they've done is they've said that you don't have to work, you don't have to register with Michigan Works right now. And what that means is there's no accountability for actual work search. And so we are hearing really every single industry saying we can't find enough people. So another item that we are actively engaged in or working toward is getting the accountability behind the work search requirement for unemployment back in full gear.
All right, and let's touch in on the IRS. Actually, in the American Recovery Plan Act added a meal deductibility. Maybe it was CARES. I've lost track of when that came back. And so some guidance came out from the IRS just last week.
Yeah, and I think we've got a link that we can share in the comments here, so you can see the IRS guidance. But basically, what it does is it allows for the full deductibility of meals in like business meals, and this is meant to help. It was done to help restaurants to gin up the demand for it, and to allow full deductibility where it wasn't fully deductible before. So increasing demand and also providing a bit of a tax benefit for those types of transactions as well. So it's a nice little side benefit, if you will, as we try to get back. Business travel is not really ramped up in a substantial way, certainly not here in Michigan, but this type of incentive, and you go out and have a business meal, that meals and entertainment line item that most businesses have, it'll be more fully deductible now.
All right, and more information on our website. Let's end with this. There was a report that came out recently, not that we didn't know this, but the city of Lansing, actually 25% of the office space in the city of Lansing is from state employees. And I think we're going to have a case study in the impact on downtowns of people not going back to work, and particularly state employees not going back to work, continuing to work remotely through at least 4th of July, it looks like.
Yeah, and so you got a couple things happening. First of all, there's kind of a slow reentry into office. It's still really not allowed now to the extent that it's possible to do remote work. So, but the state is never going to return to the extent that they were before. And the only difference, so we look at Lansing and say, wow, Lansing's going to get hit really hard, and the city of Lansing will get hit very hard. They have a city income tax. If the office workers aren't there, it will be a major decline, less demand in the property values will fall, to be a major decline in the revenue there. The only difference, though, really, I think the only difference between what the state of Michigan is doing and really what's happening across all industries right now is the state of Michigan is a public body, and so it's having this discussion out in the open. But I think our downtown areas have a lot of risks right now, and but they can't even start to figure out what the future looks like. Who's going to be in, who's going to be out, who wants to come back in, who's going to stay remote, all that kind of stuff. until they're allowed to even plan for that reentry. And that's it's become very critical now that Michigan being, I believe this is true, the last state in the country to have such a strict restriction on office work. It needs to be loosened up so we can at least start the process of reinventing our cities that we know are going to get hit really, really hard long term after this pandemic. Some of those impacts won't really be felt for a year or two when the new property tax assessment rules start impacting the local municipalities.
Yeah. That really is going to happen all across our state. It's just so concentrated in Lansing because of the state employee presence. All right, well, thanks for joining us today. We do have a couple of webinars coming up. Thursday of this week, cybersecurity and data privacy. That is on Thursday, the 29th at 2 o'clock, brought to us by our friends from Brooks Cushman, the law firm. And also on May 4th, a webinar on Bitcoin, blockchain, and business, kind of an introduction to the technology around Bitcoin and probably some things small businesses need to know. That's May 4th at 2 o'clock. Thanks for joining us again today. See you back here Thursday at 3 o'clock. In the meantime, remember to wash your hands.
And don't touch your face. See you on Thursday.